Right. So yesterday, you guys listened to a book that Miss Kellogg did, and it was called A River Ran Wild. And you were looking at the changes that happened to this river, right? The Nishua River, and the changes that happened, how people, the settlers, impacted the river and over time, right? And so you got to see those changes over time. And that's what we're focusing on today, is really focusing on what are the changes that you see of things that happened 100 years ago and today. And so we're going to be comparing those. And that's comparing and contrasting. Okay, so we're going to do that with our hands. We're going to compare and we're going to contrast. When we compare, we're trying to find the similarities between two things. Okay, when we contrast, we're looking at the differences between two things. Okay, so the similarities and the differences. I'm going to show you a little slideshow here. And here we go. We're looking at the differences. So how things have changed over time. And so there's two pictures here. There's a picture of Sebastopol in 1900. And you guys might notice that name Sebastopol, right? That's a city near us. So this is an actual picture in 1900 of the city of Sebastopol and what it looked like. So you would notice here, let's look at the architecture of the buildings and of the roads, right? It looks a lot different in between these two pictures, right? The buildings, this one looks like it might be a brick building. So a lot of buildings were built out of brick in those days, also out of wood. And the roads, if you look at the roads, it's dirt roads. So you're seeing that instead of asphalt here, you're seeing that these are dirt roads. And it doesn't really look like they had cement walkways. So in here, there are cement walkways. So you're seeing that there's a lot of differences, right? At least in the architecture of it. Even the transportation, do you see any cars in the road? No, there's no cars in the road, right? There's horse and buggies. So people would go places on their horse or in their horse and buggy or a wagon. So now you see cars on the road, right? And you see paved roads instead of dirt roads. So there's a lot of differences that have changed between Sebastopol from now and then 100 years ago. Here is Los Angeles. Anybody ever been to Los Angeles? I used to live there. So here's a picture of Los Angeles in 1900. So again, over 100 years ago. And you look at the buildings. I want you to notice the differences between the buildings. It's changed a lot, right? The buildings are much, much, much taller now. Even the roads are a lot different, right? We use, instead of trolleys, here they had trolleys in Los Angeles. Now we use buses and cars. So again, they had horse and wagons and trolleys that helped people go places. So really a lot of different, the buildings were quite smaller than they are now. So if you look at the one over here, the buildings are really, really, really tall. So those are the differences and the similarities between the city of San Francisco 100 years ago. Okay, so now for your independent work, we are going to be, I'm going to have you guys complete 3 slides. And we are comparing, right, what things looked like around 100 years ago and what things looked like now. And so the first one you're going to compare and contrast, so compare the similarities and contrast the differences, is the transportation. So I put 2 cars on here. One car that's about 100 years old, maybe a little bit earlier, but about 100 years old. And look at the differences between this car and a car now. What are some similarities and differences that you see in them? So look at the tires. Is there something similar about the tires or something different about the tires? Look at the lights. Look at the windows. Look at the way that it's the model of it. So the roof here of the car compared to a roof here. So think about at least one similarity and one difference between these 2 cars. Your next one is going to be to compare an architecture of a house. So this is a house that was about 100 years ago that was built, and this is a house now. So what do you see that's similar between these houses? So really dig deep. Look at that. Look at the windows. Look at the pillars. Does this house have pillars? Look, notice that how many stories it is. Is it similar to how many stories this house has? Look at, just different things. So try and find at least one thing that you find that's similar and one thing that you find that is different between these two houses. And then the last thing I want you to compare and contrast is clothing. So this is a picture of some gentlemen that were about 100 years ago, and this is what they wore back then. So they normally wore suits, most men did. And here is a picture of some men now also wearing suits. But look at the differences and the similarities. What do you see that's different? Okay, what do you see that's the same? And again, I want you to list at least one similarity and at least one difference. So that is your assignment. And remember, we want you to go away from this assignment and just understanding that times have changed, right? Over 100 years, times have changed. And some things are the same, but a lot of things are different. And our world has changed a lot from 100 years ago. So that's really what we want you guys to understand as you leave this lesson in this activity.